Earlier this year, I took a course on the book of Genesis. Great course, learned a lot. Several of the points you'll hear in today's sermon will come from that course. And one of the assignments for this course was to pick a 15-verse passage from Genesis and memorize it. So I picked this passage, Genesis 32, verse 22, to chapter 33, verse 4, memorized it, went up to the front of the class, and recited it from memory. My teacher then asked me why I picked this passage to memorize. I gave an answer at the time, but today I'm going to give a longer answer. Let's start with the passage itself. And no, I will not be reciting it from memory today. Sorry to disappoint. If you're unsure about where this passage takes place, don't worry. I will give more context as we go. For now, the basic version is Jacob and his family are about to meet Jacob's brother Esau, who was very upset with Jacob the last time he saw him. I'll start at Genesis 32, verse 22, and read straight through to Genesis 33, verse 4. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. And Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel, and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Great story, right? It has narrative tension, reconciliation, and wrestling. What more could you want? Yeah, Bill's in agreement. And yes, the passage is a powerful one on its own. But today I want to show what led to this moment. I want to show why I picked this passage to memorize for class. To do this, I'm going to rewind a few chapters in Genesis so we can answer a few questions along the way. Who is this man Jacob that we see here? What is the deal between him and Esau? Why is Jacob wrestling some guy all night? And of course, why should I care about any of this? Here's the plan. I have concentric circles to represent the layers I want to get at so we can better understand the passage itself. We'll start with the outer ring, he who grabs the heel, by looking at several events throughout Jacob's lifetime leading up to the moment we already read about. If you're wondering why I'm talking about grabbing heels, you'll find out soon. Next, we'll zoom in a bit to the moment where Jacob has to face Esau. This includes the passage we read, but also the moments before and after that passage. If you're wondering why Jacob has to face Esau, again, hold your questions for later. Once we know the events surrounding the wrestling match, we will zoom in again and look at the wrestle match itself, answering some questions along the way. Finally, the lesson in the center of these concentric circles will be unlocked. What did Jacob learn about God through this encounter? And what do we learn about Christ today through this passage? Let's get started by looking at he who grabs the heel. There are 9 events listed on the slide. That's a lot. I will be moving quickly through these events, which means there will be details that I skim over or skip entirely. Sorry about that. Hopefully, though, as we blitz through these events, we will see a progression throughout Jacob's life. What kind of person is Jacob initially? What kind of family did he grow up in? And how does he understand the blessing that God has for him? Okay, ready? Here we go. We start all the way back in chapter 25 of Genesis. I won't read this whole passage, but I'll mention a few things. Isaac and Rebekah have been faithfully praying to God to have a child. Finally, Rebekah is pregnant with not one, but 2 sons. But the children are struggling within her to such a degree that she's crying out to God. And God tells her these 2 sons will be divided against one another. But God doesn't just explain the division. He ends verse 23 by saying, the older shall serve the younger. This statement, the older shall serve the younger, would be deeply counterintuitive. In the society of the time, it was assumed that the firstborn son would have higher status over the other children. This statement, the older shall serve the younger, goes against that cultural norm. But this is what God told Rebekah. Jacob has been blessed by God before he is even born. How will Rebekah and Isaac respond to this word from God? Will they ensure Jacob, the younger son, gets the blessing God has already determined he will get? Will they work through conflicts between Jacob and Esau in a way that teaches them to live more harmoniously? Well, that's not what happens. These verses come immediately after the previous verses. Esau is born first and gets named based on his thick red hair. Then we get the heel grabber, Jacob. His name, which basically means heel grabber, was picked based on him grabbing Esau's heel. So Jacob is born, and that is the name chosen to reflect his identity. Later in Genesis 25, Jacob and Esau grow up, and we get a glimpse into their brotherly dynamic. Esau comes home hungry, likely frustrated from not bringing home food from his hunting, and tells Jacob to give him some food. Jacob, in a shockingly opportunistic move, offers Esau food in exchange for his birthright. And in case you're wondering, no, this was not a culturally normal practice of the time. The idea of selling your birthright would have made no sense to anybody except for Jacob. So yes, Esau is incredibly foolish and short-sighted when he agrees to sell his birthright. But this also reveals a couple things about Jacob. One is that Jacob is relentlessly pursuing whatever opportunity he can go after. Now, going after what you want is not a bad itself and can actually be a great quality. For example, my friend Wesley is someone who feels comfortable requesting what he wants. There would be times at school where we would get food from the cafeteria, and the food could use some extra rice or extra sauce or something along those lines. Now, my tendency is to just accept what I get as the final word on the matter. But not Wesley. No, this guy would go right up and ask for what he wanted on the food. He was always polite, and if they said no, that was fine. But the point is, he would ask for what he wanted. I admire that. Now, asking for extra rice is a lot different than asking your brother to sell your birthright. So, okay, back to Jacob. The second thing we learn is that Jacob he seems kind of obsessed with getting his blessing. It is at the very least very regularly top of mind for him. But why is Jacob even pursuing blessing if God already blessed him pre-birth? Hold on to that question as we continue. We see a family dynamic in Genesis 27 where Isaac sides with Esau and Rebekah sides with Jacob. In other words, there is division in the family. It's a long passage. Read it for yourself sometime. Here's a short version of this tragic story. Isaac is old, can't see well, wants to bless Esau, not Isaac, before Isaac dies. Furthermore, there is no indication that Isaac plans to offer Jacob any blessing at all. That's not good. But Rebekah overhears the scheme and hatches her own scheme. The plan is for Jacob to lie to his old blind father and steal the blessing intended for his brother. Jacob expresses one concern about getting caught, but is otherwise on board with this plan. That's not good. Jacob goes in, lies his face off, gets all the blessing, leaves nothing for Esau. Esau comes back, finds out, and lets out this guttural cry that is described as exceedingly great and bitter. That's not good. Jacob gets the blessing, but his identity as deceiver is cemented here. So why did this happen at all if God already told the family Esau will serve Jacob? It seems this family was not living in the reality of what God had said. Jacob gets the blessing, but at what cost? Well, the cost ends up being that Jacob has to run away from his family. Esau is ready to murder Jacob, and Rebekah sets the wheels in motion for Isaac to send Jacob off. The thing I'll highlight here is that Jacob is now experiencing consequences for rushing God's timeline. Jacob had already had God's blessing, but felt the need to steal it from his father too. In the end, this ultimately did not prevent God's plans from happening, but this family didn't live according to God's purposes and suffered a family breakup because of it. As Jacob is running away, he stops in Bethel and has a dream from God about a ladder from heaven. It is also a moment where God reaffirms to Jacob several promises he originally promised to Abraham. There's a lot more that could be unpacked in this passage, but I will not be the one unpacking it today. Instead, I just want to highlight one thing about how Jacob responds to God. The vow Jacob makes in verses 20 and 21 is one filled with conditions. Jacob needs 1, for God to be with him. 2, to keep him in the way he'll go. 3, to give him food. 4, clothing. And 5th, return him safely to his family. If God fulfills those 5 conditions, then the Lord shall be his God. God has shown up powerfully through a dream and personally reaffirmed for him the promises of Abraham will happen through Jacob. And Jacob is putting conditions on his faithfulness to God. It indicates that, yes, Jacob has been impacted by this encounter with God. But no, his journey of faith is not nearly finished yet. There are a few more events before we catch up to today's passage, but I'm going to try to move even quicker through these. 1, there is an ongoing rivalry between Jacob and his uncle Laban. When Jacob arrives in Haran, Jacob wants to marry Laban's daughter, Rachel, and agrees to work 7 years for her. But Laban tricks Jacob into working 14 years for him in exchange for both daughters, Rachel and Leah. Later on, Jacob gets the upper hand back, and we see the two of them trying to outwit one another. Up until this point, we've just seen Jacob running circles around Esau, outwitting him every time. But here, Jacob meets his match in Uncle Laban. Next, we have Jacob starting a family. But it's no ordinary family. No, Jacob ends up having 11 sons by 4 different women. How do you think that turned out? It did not turn out well. There was some conflict in the family. Finally, Jacob and his family make their escape from Haran and from Uncle Laban. During Jacob's final confrontation with Laban, we hear Jacob reflect on his 20 years in Haran, and we see that Jacob's relationship with God has grown during that time. So, Jacob gets away from Laban, but there is one more challenge facing him. Esau is coming. What will Jacob do? Stay tuned to find out. One more thing before we move on from recapping Jacob's life. Here is a map to help visualize Jacob running away from home. The text on the map is too small to see, so just follow along the numbers. The 1 in the bottom left corner of the map is Beersheba, which is where Jacob was up until the point of deceiving his father. The 2 a little further up is Bethel, where Jacob encounters God and makes his conditional vow with him. Then we get all the way up to 3 in the top right corner, which is Haran, where Jacob settled for 20 years. And then going back down to the 4 is the Jabbok River, where Jacob has to face Esau. Okay, time to zoom in a bit to the upcoming reunion between Jacob and Esau. Here is the big picture view of chapters 32 and 33. Act 1, Jacob is getting ready to face Esau. Act 2, we witness a strange wrestling match between Jacob the heel grabber and God. I'm calling Jacob the heel grabber here because I think it works well as a pro wrestling stage name. And then in Act 3, Jacob finally faces Esau. I'll start with a visual of the Jabbok River, since it's where the action here takes place. At the beginning of the passage, Jacob is on the Mahanaim side of the river. By the end, he's on the Peniel side of the river. And then after Jacob's encounter with Esau, Jacob heads west to Succoth, and Esau heads south to Seir. Hopefully that helps you visualize the setting. On to Act 1. The story going into Genesis 32 is that Jacob and his family have escaped Laban, but must now face Esau. I'll read these verses here. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your lord Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Last time Jacob saw Esau, 20 years ago, Esau was ready to kill Jacob for stealing his blessing from Isaac. Here we see Jacob sending messengers ahead to find Esau and make a plea for Esau's favor. Jacob's plan at this point is basically bribe Esau into forgiving him by giving him whatever property he wants. Notably, we don't hear what Esau says in response to this message. Instead, we're just told Esau is coming with 400 men. What does this mean? Is it good? Bad? We don't know yet. And this heightens the narrative tension. Now we'll see Jacob's response. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. Okay, so we know how Jacob has interpreted the situation. Jacob is ready for Esau to come with an army and destroy not only Jacob, but everything and everyone Jacob cares about. Jacob's mind turns to damage control and is splitting his camps up accordingly. Now, Jacob does something his younger self likely would not have done. He turns to God. Here's what he says. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." Notice how different this is to Jacob's vow to God at Bethel. Back at Bethel, Jacob treated the situation more like a negotiation where he could dictate the terms. Now we see a man humbled, acutely aware that he simultaneously needs help and doesn't deserve it. But he also knows God is good. He knows this through experience. God has come through on his provinces and has provided for Jacob all these years. And Jacob remembers the blessings that God has promised him. Jacob is ready for the upcoming wrestling match. Jacob has his plan ready in place to try to appease Esau. He has sent waves of animals that the servants can offer as gifts to Esau. We can see in verse 20 that Jacob thinking to himself, perhaps then Esau will accept me. Jacob has even sent his family ahead of him across the river. The scene is set, and Jacob is left alone, ready for the wrestling match with God. Next up is Act 3. Oh yeah, I guess I skipped something. What about Act 2? Well, I'm going to come back to it in a moment. For now, I'll tell the end of the story, so we have a sense of the overall narrative. Then I'll focus on the wrestling match specifically. Okay, so Act 3. And Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. Jacob, freshly injured from his wrestling match, heads toward Esau. He doesn't know what will happen when he meets Esau, but he is ready. He will not hide behind his family, but will instead go on ahead of them. Meanwhile, Esau sees his brother off in the distance, bowing to the ground 7 times. What will Esau do? The narrative tension is at its maximum height here. Finally, we get our answer. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. The narrative tension has been resolved. In verses 4 through 10, we see reconciliation between these 2 brothers who have been separated for 20 years by conflict. Jacob describes it like seeing the face of God. We will soon see that Jacob knows this from his experience the night before. The rest of Genesis 33 shows Esau and Jacob parting ways peacefully. Esau offers to bring Jacob to where he is, but Jacob declines. Why does he decline? In verse 13, Jacob says the journey is too perilous for his children and flocks. There could have been also economic concerns with there not being enough land between Jacob and Esau. And maybe Jacob had other reasons too for not wanting to journey with Esau after reconciling with him. We don't really know for sure, but we do know they are at peace with one another as they part ways. In verse 15, Esau offers some of his men as an escort for Jacob, which Jacob declines. Maybe Esau's offer to Jacob here answers the mystery of why Esau came with 400 men. Again, it's not hard to know for sure, but the main point here is the 2 brothers are at peace with one another. And now it's time for the wrestle match itself. Here is the moment you've all been waiting for. In one corner, we have Jacob, the heel grabber. And in the other corner, we have some random guy. This passage is a bit strange, and there are some interpretive questions that come up as we focus in on this passage. One, who is Jacob wrestling? Is it really just some random guy? Was it God, as verse 30 indicates? Was it an angel, which interpreters have suggested based on Hosea 12, verse 4? Interpreters have also wondered if the account is a myth or if it was Esau's guardian angel. Today we'll look at the text ourselves and see what conclusion we reach. Another question is, why did Jacob end up with an injury? So we'll briefly look at that. The biggest interpretive question, though, is what does it mean for Jacob to be renamed Israel? This is why we spent time going through Jacob's entire life to help answer this question. Let's start at verse 24. And Jacob was left alone. The context of this verse tells us this is the night before Jacob has to face Esau. This may have been the most stressful night of Jacob's life. So keep that in mind. Okay, I'll continue. And a man. So at this point, it just says man. There's nothing divine suggested here as of yet. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. So still nothing particularly divine about the situation yet. But it is really weird, right? If you were alone at night and some random man wanted to wrestle with you for several hours, would you do it? Hands up if you would do it. We got Arjun's ready. Oh, okay, wow, 2 hands. That was 2 more than I was expecting. Okay, Dan's suggesting Thursday. Okay, we'll have some follow-up announcements about that. All right, so what was Jacob's thought process here? Was he just so full of nervous energy, he just wrestled the first man who was willing? Where did this guy come from? We don't know the answers to these questions. And I'd say that's kind of the point. We aren't given all the details, but only the ones that are most important. Let's look at the next verse. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. So now we're seeing that this man is not just some ordinary man. He has the supernatural ability to put Jacob's hip out of joint with one touch. We also see from the way he did not prevail against Jacob, that Jacob is refusing to give up. The question at this point is why? If Jacob thought this was just some random guy he wanted to wrestle, why would he continue on for this long? Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So we have an answer to our why question from the previous verse. Jacob wants this man's blessing and will persist in wrestling him until he gets it. This means Jacob thinks this man can bless him. Why does he think that? Maybe Jacob has a sense of this man's true identity. These two verses are key to the whole passage. Let's read it. And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." What just happened here? Jacob, whose name is heel grabber, has been renamed to Israel, which means he strives with God, or to put it in different words, he and God strive together. This is different from how Jacob has lived his life so far, where he is constantly striving, but he doesn't act as though God is with him. This is the powerful moment of Jacob's identity being reshaped as he is renamed. Could anyone but God perform this change? Let's continue on with verse 29. Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. This is pretty similar to how God responds to Moses when Moses asks for God's name in Exodus 3, verses 13 and 14. It's also the case that basically whenever you see blessing in Genesis and throughout the Bible, we see that God is pretty much always the one who blesses. Still wondering who it was that Jacob wrestled with? Verse 30 gives that answer plainly. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Jacob says he saw God face to face. And I would say that makes sense, given what we've read. So there's still debate out there, but for me today, I'll say Jacob wrestled with God. Maybe we don't know exactly how that works, but I'm okay with not knowing that. One more thing in verses 31 and 32 before we move on. What is the deal with Jacob's injury? I would say there's two sides to this. On the one side, this injury served as a reminder for future Israelites of God's blessing. Jacob persisted in wrestling God, and God's favor was the result of that wrestling. However, the other side of this is getting your hip put out of joint is excruciatingly painful. And Jacob was stuck with a limp for the rest of his life, which would be painful too. Did Jacob need to go through this pain to learn his lesson? Probably. You could even think of this as yet another time in Jacob's life where he had to go through painful consequences to learn his lesson. So, his persistence in wrestling God was good, but also painful. One other little thing, if you're wondering why Peniel in verse 30 is different from Penuel in verse 31, they're the same place as far as we know, but there are different spellings here. There's a whole rabbit hole regarding why the spellings are different, but we won't get into that. Okay, we've made it this far. What was the lesson for Jacob? What is the lesson for us? Here's the lesson for Jacob. Stop fighting God. Let God name you. Live in that identity. This is the lesson Jacob had to learn in order to become Israel. He had to stop his natural tendency of fighting God every step of the way. Now, what I'm not saying is be passive. Don't go after things. And yeah, many sermons on Jacob wrestling God emphasize his persistence in seeking God, and rightly so. However, the other side of it, which I'm emphasizing today, is Jacob needed to surrender. And to learn that lesson of surrender, he went through excruciating pain to get there. And it was getting through that pain that allowed him to receive God renaming him to Israel. And then he had to live in that identity going forward. It's worth noting as well that as the story continued, Israel struggled at times to live in that identity. Jacob had a powerful turning point here with God and becomes Israel. But Israel continues to journey with God, make mistakes along the way, and have additional moments of learning to trust God. This was not only a case for Israel the man, but also for Israel the nation. This does not diminish the power of the story, but instead shows that the journey continues. Once again, stop fighting God, let God name you, live in that identity. Now, what about us? Maybe you're like Jacob, fighting for everything you want in life, including Christ's love. Maybe you heard me describing Jacob today and you thought, oh no, that's me. Well, the good news is you can follow in Jacob's footsteps, hopefully in a less painful way. Now, maybe instead, you look at Jacob and think, I'm nothing like that. Honestly, I find it tempting to think that way myself. But the truth is, I have my own ways of fighting for Christ's love. I'll say a bit more about that. So for the past couple of years, I was struggling with a feeling of discouragement. Now, this was a 2-year journey, so right now I'm going to simplify many of the details as I tell it. Basically, though, this feeling of discouragement was one that weighed heavy on me at times. I tried many different methods during that time for dealing with the discouragement. Again, I'm simplifying here, but basically sometimes these methods were helpful, but other times they actually made the discouragement worse. Back in October, I was at a retreat with some guys from church and spent some time alone with God during that retreat. During one of those moments alone with God, I was expressing how discouraged I felt. And I heard him say to me, try less. In the moment, I partially understood what God was getting at. God wanted me to stop trying so hard to make my situation better and to instead wait on his grace and on his timing. And then from that place of God's grace, I could have clarity about what steps to take. So I say I partially understood that try less message at the time, because for the next few months, I continued to try more things, again, with mixed results. Finally, after that additional time, God's message, try less, sunk in for me, not just in terms of understanding it, but in living it. Since then, I have felt the difference in terms of not trying to fix everything that's wrong with me, but instead follow the guidance of God's rhythm. My journey with Christ continues, but that recent turning point in my life is also part of why I wanted to preach about Jacob today. I'll finish by praying, and as I pray, ask yourself these questions. What happens when you stop to listen? And who does Jesus say you are? So I'll just invite you to enter a posture of prayer, and I'll start us off and go from there. Yeah, so Lord Jesus, we so often try to do it on our own. And there are things you want us to do, but you want us to do it with you. And so I pray that you would speak to us in this moment about what does it mean to stop fighting you? What does it mean to receive the identity you have for me? What does it mean to live in that identity? And so if this is something that's connecting with you, just stay in that mode of prayer. All right, I'm going to say amen in a moment, but if you're connecting with this, stay in it. Or, you can turn to the person next to you and invite them to pray with you, or you can go up to the prayer team in a moment and invite them to pray with you. But if you're just sensing this is a moment where you need to persist in praying to God, then persist in that. Now for everyone else, amen.